In 2015, while protesting against the building of a mosque in Bendigo, patriot activist Blair Cottrell cut the head off a dummy made of pillows. He did this to bring attention to the threat Islam poses and to bring attention to the protest itself. Nobody was hurt and no property was damaged. Despite the lack of any victim, the Victorian state, under traitor Premier Dick Ears Daniel Andrews, decided to charge him and 2 others with intending to hurt Muslims' feelings. Given the law in the current year acts against the interests of Australians, the court found the 3 men guilty and fined them $2,000 for hurting Muslim feelings. This despite the fact that no Muslim actually complained. The state brought the charges unilaterally. Given the Australian Constitution has an implied right to freedom of political communication, and this was a political protest, Cottrell decided to appeal the decision. After several years and a number of court hearings, including a visit to the High Court, the state decided to uphold Cottrell's conviction for cutting up a pillow. From the Unshackled, quote, "Cottrell has again been found guilty and convicted under Section 25(2) of the Victorian Racial and Religious Tolerance Act of 2001 and fined $2,000 for intent to incite serious contempt, revulsion or severe ridicule of Muslims." The lengthy legal battle followed Cottrell's initial conviction under the section in a trial at a Melbourne Magistrates Court in September 2017, along with Neil Erickson and Christopher Shortis, where they were all fined $2,000 each. This judgment came in the wake of a 4-day trial at the County Court of Victoria from November 11th to 14th, overseen by Chief Judge Peter Kidd. As well as appealing the conviction, Blair Cottrell and his lawyer John Bolton also argued that the Act violated the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities and Australia's implied constitutional freedom to political communication. Judge Kidd also found the Act to be constitutionally valid. End quote. The judge declared that Blair Cottrell did indeed intend to incite serious contempt, revulsion or severe ridicule of Muslims. Mind reading must be a special talent of judges these days. Keep in mind, Islam commands conquest of the world and the establishment of a global caliphate. To even follow this religion in Australia is an act of treason. The founding fathers of this country would be rolling in their graves if they heard this court's decision, but I digress. More interesting than the verdict itself was the media reaction, as well as what this verdict actually means in terms of the law and the future of our country. Thank you so much for watching so far. I promise the content will resume in a moment. This work relies on the generosity of loyal fans to support it, and the best way you can do that, other than sharing the video, is by heading over to RRTV and making a pledge. Not only does this support my work, but it supports a number of independent creators. The added bonus being you get access to a small but growing pool of exclusive RRTV content with any pledge. Thank you so much for your support. Now, back to the important stuff. Arrgh. Throughout this case, the Australian mainstream media has not once hidden their agenda. They repeatedly defamed Cottrell as a National Socialist and worse. Then, after he lost his appeal, they could not wait to attack him personally again. The Australian Associated Press immediately released an article calling him a hate monger. Keep in mind, this is not an editorial or an opinion column. They are pretending this is objective journalism. Several mainstream media outlets syndicated this article, including The Age, 9 News, The Daily Mail, SBS News and plenty more. It is fair to say that this is exactly why nobody trusts the mainstream media. They will lie about, defame and attack individuals for little more than wrongthink, while attempting to pass it off as objective journalism. It is worth noting that not even extremist far-left propaganda rag The Guardian stooped so low as to label Cottrell a hate monger in an article labelled journalistic reporting. Instead, they chose the now cliched and essentially meaningless far-right extremist. Regarding the trial itself, Blair Cottrell had this to say.
I would think about appealing again to a higher court like I planned to do in the beginning. I wanted to get to High Court or Supreme Court, but I was told go to County first. It's kind of hard to appeal though when I'm not permitted to have a bank account or to use PayPal to raise funds for legal defence or even advice. So, I think it's pretty amusing that people say we have the right to a fair trial in this country, but when you're on the wrong side of the law and politics is involved, they close your bank account and the bank tells you, oh, sorry, we've got to do this, we can't explain why. Honestly, if I understood what this law meant, how it was worded and what it really consisted of, I probably never would have appealed in the first place. Because two things everybody should understand about the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act. Diversity and multiculturalism, they aren't just a political slogan, they are the law. You can disagree with that law, but if you take steps to prevent multiculturalism, openly and publicly, you could technically be breaking the law. And that's the reality of that act. Second thing, when you criticise a specific ethnic or religious group in this country, you're also technically breaking the law at the discretion of the state. So obviously that law is not going to be brought into the defence of white or Christian people, but other people, sure. But if I understood this from the beginning, that I really didn't have much of a defence in the first place, I wouldn't have wasted my time. But a couple of years ago, there was various signs that it could turn out in my favour, and I promised people that I would take it all the way, and so that's what I did. The real problem in this country is not Muslims, and I was never really an anti-Muslim activist from the beginning. My agenda was quite extensive and broad. Mostly, my political activism was about highlighting institutional corruption at a government level of media, education, law enforcement, military. I viewed all these institutions as corrupt and being deliberately subverted to basically destabilise Australia and introduce a more authoritarian state regime similar to communism or an international communist regime of some sort. That was the purpose of my activism, but the state in this case has chosen to hone in on, he said this about Muslims one time, and have successfully duped the judge into believing that I was out just to insult Muslims, But what the funny thing is that my self-proclaimed political opponents, who I never considered opponents, they identified me as an opponent, the Marxists and the anarchist clubs, and the state prosecutor herself. They know I'm not guilty of setting out to offend Muslims, and not a single Muslim complained to have me sent to court on this particular occasion. This was all just a big witch hunt, an effort to try to intimidate me or maybe, shut me up, waste my money, etc., etc. It's done neither, really. I mean, I'm pretty resourceful, so I don't need a great deal of money to survive. And it hasn't really done anything to silence me. It's only further emboldened me and convinced me that there is an institutional corruption that's so extensive that when you try to highlight it, they'll take you to court and try to send you to jail. So
this case comes at a time when multiculturalism is destroying our once great nation. Every day, more and more foreigners flood our shores against the will of the people. Our cities grow more clogged, hospital wait times get worse, wages remain low, living costs grow, and, as Blair stated, it is technically illegal to stand up and protest against it. The oligarchs expect Australians to sit down and take all manner of crimes against us in unquestioning silence. Meanwhile, ethnic crime is not going anywhere. In fact, it's getting much worse, with African gangs, whom the mainstream media now call youths and teens, continuing to terrorise Aussies throughout Melbourne. Just recently, a gang the media describes as young men bashed grandfather Anthony Clark to death. It was a senseless and random attack, yet no mainstream media article mentions the perpetrator's ethnicity, despite witness reports the attackers were African. In fact, the fake news media went out of their way to prevent any mention of race. They did use the terms youths and now young men because telling the whole truth does not fit the fake news agenda. At the time of writing this, the police, under traitor Dick Ears Dan, have laid no charges for the crime, nor have the federal government deported any youths. It is not just African youths either that we are dealing with. There is also the escalating and oft unreported issue of Middle Eastern organised crime. These gangs peddle methamphetamines, illegal tobacco and guns in Australian suburbs, all while regular Australians remain defenceless. In 1996, the supposedly conservative Howard government took away the right to self-defence for all citizens, and now guns are in the hands of only criminals and the state. But I repeat myself. It is a lie that gun control makes us safer. In fact, there is no correlation between gun ownership, homicides, or even mass shootings. Gun control does not make us safer. This is a proven and undeniable fact. When John Howard took our guns away for our own good, he did little more than make us defenceless. The truth is, every genocide of the 20th century required some sort of gun control, because gun control is not actually about controlling guns, it is about controlling people. The very act of disarming the populace requires armed men to take those guns away. The whole point of the Second Amendment in the United States, the one about keeping and bearing arms, was not primarily about personal safety. It was always about keeping the people free and sovereign in the face of a tyrannical government. Now, Victoria Police, under traitor Premier Dick Ears Daniel Andrews, are arming themselves to the teeth, all for our own safety, of course. So, at a time when ethnic crime is on the rise, when foreigners flood our country, when we are all disarmed and essentially defenceless, and we are all at risk of heavy fines or imprisonment for calling it out, Daniel Andrews wants to establish his own standing army. Worse still, the mainstream slander merchant media, whose only jobs are to report important events objectively and hold power accountable, are essentially in on these crimes against us. It gets even worse. The lying, treasonous Victorian government and their treasonous allies in the fake news slander merchant media are hellbent on hiding the true risk to all Victorians. From Blair Cottrell, quote, "Yesterday in Melbourne, Issa Kagoglu, a 45-year-old Islamic State supporter, walked free from Victoria's County Court with a good behaviour bond after being charged with a federal crime, supporting foreign terror incursions, including sending money to Islamic State propagandist John Georgalis in Syria and to others. This is only one of hundreds of similar cases which have state-imposed suppression orders made, meaning you can be arrested and charged for reporting on them. They just let one case through occasionally, so it looks like this sort of thing is not that common, and so they can say they don't suppress all of them when questioned." Victoria has 5 times more suppression orders made on criminal matters than any other state in Australia. It is the Department of Public Prosecutions, a taxpayer-funded law agency which is directed by the state government to apply for those suppression orders, and the courts continuously grant them. The types of cases being suppressed and the real reason for such a high volume of suppression orders granted in the last few years is yet to be investigated by any media journalists, who are probably too afraid of losing their miserable jobs by doing any actual investigative work." End quote. Sit down, shut up, and take your replacement, or else. This is the very loud and very clear messaging coming from the parasitic, treasonous establishment. They expect ordinary men and women to sit silently as they destroy our country and take our rights one by one. The state threw all resources it had into fighting Blair Cottrell's appeal. Think about that for a moment. They used hundreds of thousands, if not millions of taxpayer dollars to ensure that an Australian carpenter from the Melbourne suburbs had to pay a $2,000 fine for cutting up a pillow. The lying, fake news mainstream media sided with the parasitic, treasonous government every step of the way, even calling this ordinary Australian citizen a hate monger for disagreeing with them. All while the issues he was protesting against are very real, represent a genuine threat to the Australian people, and are only getting worse. This case shows nothing more than the establishment's utter contempt for ordinary people, our right to speak freely, and their job of protecting our property. They are no longer hiding this contempt either. They truly hate Australian people and are not afraid to let us all know. There is an old quote from 16th and 17th century author John Harrington, and that is, "Treason doth never prosper." What's the reason? For if it prosper, none dare call it treason. It is important that we never stop calling the actions of the parasitic establishment what they are: gross acts of treason against the Australian nation. The same goes for all Western pawns of the globalist parasitic establishment. They are traitors guilty of the crime of treason against us all. They are wicked people who reject our Lord and rebel against his law, going so far as to venerate the worst sins imaginable. The parasitic establishment flood our nation with foreigners against our will. They flood our economy with fake usury money. They flood our common narrative with lies and degenerate sodomite filth. Then they silence and persecute anyone who dares speak out against them. Never have they once asked us if any of this was okay, instead choosing to inflict their will upon us through subversion, lies, and force. This is an intolerable situation and will eventually come to a head because society cannot continue much longer under the current regime. Given the state of the world financial system, it appears people may soon get the wake-up call they desperately need, but who knows when the tower will collapse. Until then, and when that happens, stay safe, stay calm, rest assured that natural order always reasserts itself, and when it does, it is always those at the top who learn the hard way what happens when you rebel against God. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please share the truth around, and I'll see ya when I see ya.